The woman the world forgot. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today's story is about rediscovery, courage, and the strength it takes to remember who you are after the world forgets you. The morning sun poured through the wide windows of a quiet apartment on the edge of the city, bathing everything in a soft golden glow. In that apartment, a woman named Elena Hayes sat at her dining table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring blankly out the window at the moving world below. Cars honked, people hurried, laughter echoed from the street cafe across the block, and yet her life was silent. It had been that way for years. She had built a home but not a life inside it. She had once been vibrant, a dreamer filled with color and laughter. Now her days felt like black and white photographs, beautiful but empty of warmth. Once upon a time, Elena had been known for her art, the way she captured light, emotion, and life on a canvas had drawn the attention of critics and collectors. She had opened small exhibitions, sold her work, and even taught art to children at a community center. That was before she met Adrian Carter, a man whose charm could make rooms pause. He was powerful, successful, and confident, the kind of man people noticed. He had walked into her gallery one stormy evening, stopped in front of a painting of a woman standing alone in the rain and said softly, "She looks like she's waiting for someone who forgot she existed." That one line had changed everything. Adrian had become the someone who didn't forget her, at least not in the beginning. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion and promise. He encouraged her dreams, he believed in her, and for the first year she believed in them. But slowly, quietly, that changed. His business grew, his attention shifted, and Elena found herself sitting alone at dinners, waiting for messages that came late or not at all. The man who once listened to every story she told now barely remembered to ask how her day was. He gave her a mansion but no meaning. And over time she realized she had become a quiet shadow in the background of his grand life, present but unseen. Years went by in that silence. Elena stopped painting. She stopped attending events. She even stopped looking at herself in the mirror because the woman she saw no longer felt familiar. Her friends faded away one by one, tired of unanswered calls and postponed plans. Loneliness wrapped around her like a second skin. But what hurt most wasn't the loneliness. It was the memory of the woman she used to be. The woman who laughed loudly, who danced barefoot while painting, who believed she could make the world brighter. That woman was gone, buried beneath years of being ignored. One evening, as the city glowed beneath a rising moon, Elena sat alone in her studio. It was a room that once pulsed with life. Now it smelled faintly of dust and forgotten oil paints. She opened an old box from the corner, and inside were the fragments of her past. Photographs, sketches, invitations to art shows. Among them was a small piece of paper with a quote she had written in her 20s. "One day, I will walk into a room and the world will remember my name." She ran her finger over the faded ink and felt tears sting her eyes. When had she given up on that promise? Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Adrian's assistant. "Mr. Carter would like to remind you of the annual Foundation Gala this Friday. Please coordinate with the stylist for your attire. No greeting, no warmth, just instructions." Elena stared at the message for a long time. The gala. Another night where she'd stand quietly beside him as photographers captured his smile, not hers. She'd wear the dress his team selected, sit at the table he arranged, and fade into the background again. But that night something inside her stirred, something long asleep but not dead. She stood up slowly, looked around her dimly lit studio, and whispered to herself, "No, not this time." It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. For the first time in years, her voice didn't tremble when she spoke. She walked to her mirror and stared into her own eyes. Beneath the exhaustion, beneath the sadness, she saw it, the spark of the woman she used to be. The next morning, Elena did something unthinkable for her routine life. She left the apartment before sunrise and took a train downtown. She didn't tell Adrian. She didn't tell anyone. She walked through familiar streets she hadn't visited in years, small art shops, bakeries, the bookstore she loved. The people there didn't know her anymore, but she felt like she was walking through the pieces of herself she had lost. She stopped at a little boutique that she used to love, not one of the luxurious ones her husband's team shopped at, but a warm, independent store filled with handmade dresses. The owner, an elderly woman named Mara, looked up from her counter and gasped softly, "Elena, My goodness, it's been ages. I thought you moved away. Elena smiled faintly. I guess I did in a way, but I think I'm finding my way back. Mara tilted her head curiously. And what brings you here today, dear? Elena hesitated, then said the words that surprised even herself. I need a dress, something that feels like me. Mara studied her quietly, then walked into the back of the store. When she returned, she was holding a dress unlike anything Elena had worn in years. It was elegant yet daring, soft ivory silk that shimmered under light, with a design that whispered confidence instead of shouting it. This one isn't about beauty, Mara said. It's about power. Quiet power. Elena ran her fingers across the fabric, and for a moment, she could almost feel the heartbeat of the woman she had once been. I'll take it, she said without hesitation. She didn't even ask the price. Some things, she realized, were worth far more than money. That night she stood before her mirror again. The city lights blinked behind her reflection. The woman looking back wasn't yet who she wanted to be, but she was closer. Closer than she had been in years. And as she traced her own features in the glass, she whispered the words that would later echo through the grand ballroom and into the hearts of everyone who heard her. This time, I'll be my own gift for the next few days. She prepared not for the gala, but for herself. She began painting again, tentatively at first. Her brush trembled as it touched the canvas, but with each stroke, she felt her strength returning. She painted not for exhibition, not for approval, but for release. Each color was a breath of life, each line a reclaiming of her own story. She painted until the sun came up, her soul pouring through the canvas in shades of fire and dawn. When Friday finally arrived, Elena woke early, calm and sure. She didn't call the stylist Adrian had hired. She didn't wear the jewelry chosen by his assistant. Instead, she put on the dress from Mara's shop, let her hair fall naturally around her shoulders, and stood in front of the mirror one last time before leaving. She wasn't dressing to impress. She was dressing to remember. As the car pulled up to the hotel where the gala was being held, Elena took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She wasn't the quiet shadow anymore. She was the light the world had forgotten, and tonight, that light was going to shine again. The night she became visible, again. The city sparkled like a sea of stars when Elena Hayes stepped out of the car in front of the Grand Royale Hotel, her ivory silk dress glowing softly under the golden lights of the grand entrance. The murmurs of conversation, the click of expensive heels against marble, and the flash of cameras created a rhythm that felt almost unreal after the quiet life she had lived for so long. For years she had arrived at these events as a silent companion, someone noticed only because she stood beside a man the world admired. But tonight was different. There was a calm strength in her posture, a silent declaration in the way she carried herself, as though every step she took was reclaiming ground that had once been stolen from her. She wasn't walking into this party as the forgotten wife of Adrian Carter. She was walking in as the woman who had found herself again. The doorman greeted her politely, and the faintest flicker of surprise crossed his eyes when she met his gaze directly and smiled with quiet confidence. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered like constellations, the air filled with laughter and the low hum of a string quartet playing near the grand staircase. It was a world of wealth, ambition, and pretense. People dressed in perfection but hiding exhaustion behind their smiles. Elena had once felt out of place in this world, trying to blend into the glitter so that no one would notice how invisible she felt. Tonight, however, she didn't blend. She didn't need to. Her presence was a whisper that drew attention without demanding it. She saw Adrian across the room before he saw her. Surrounded by business partners and investors, he looked exactly as he always did, confident, polished, untouchable. For years she had watched him from afar, admiring the image he built and wondering why it no longer included her. But as she looked at him now, she felt something new. Not resentment, not longing, just clarity. She finally saw the man behind the reputation, and she saw herself apart from him. When his eyes finally found her, the conversation around him seemed to falter. For a brief moment, surprise softened his features. It was the first time in years she had managed to silence him without saying a word. He walked toward her, his expression caught between admiration and discomfort. "You look different tonight," he said at last, his tone cautious, as if uncertain whether to compliment or question her. "I feel different," she answered, her voice calm but firm. "And that's the point." Adrian glanced around at the other guests, conscious of the curious eyes turned toward them. "We'll talk later," he murmured, the kind of phrase he always used to postpone anything that didn't serve his schedule. But Elena didn't let the old script repeat. "No," she said quietly. "We'll talk now." Something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't rebellion or anger. It was composure, and that was something he didn't know how to fight. "Adrian," she continued, "do you even know what day it is?" He frowned slightly, glancing at his watch as if the answer might be hidden there. "Friday?" Her smile was soft, almost sad. "It's our anniversary." The color drained from his face for a second before he recovered his practiced composure. Elena, I've been so caught up." "I know," she interrupted, her voice steady but not cold. "You've been caught up for 3 years. Caught up in your empire, your meetings, your image. And in the middle of it all, you forgot that I was standing right here next to you, waiting for you to look at me." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of truth, heavy and undeniable. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a familiar voice approached. "Mrs. Carter?" It was one of the senior partners from Adrian's company, a kind man named Richard Hale. "It's been ages. You look radiant this evening." "Thank you, Richard," Elena said, turning to greet him warmly. "It's good to finally be part of the conversation again." Richard laughed softly. "You've been missed. Your insights on the company's art initiatives were invaluable back then." Elena smiled. "Art still matters to me. Maybe more now than ever. I'm thinking of reviving a project I once started, using art therapy for children in shelters." The group around them nodded in interest, and soon others joined, drawn to the conversation. For the first time in years, Elena found herself surrounded by people who weren't talking about stocks, numbers, or deals. They were listening to her speak about something real. She saw admiration in their eyes, genuine curiosity, and it felt like breathing fresh air after years in a sealed room. Adrian stood nearby, silent, watching his wife command attention effortlessly, not because of him, but because of herself. As the evening progressed, Elena moved through the room like a quiet melody. She wasn't loud or flamboyant, yet people gravitated toward her. She talked with the senator's wife about funding art in schools, shared laughter with a group of entrepreneurs who found her authenticity refreshing, and even caught the attention of a reporter who whispered to her, "Mrs. Carter, it's rare to see such grace at these events. May I quote you on your project?" Elena simply smiled and nodded, realizing how ironic it was that the woman who once felt invisible was now being asked for her words. Later in the evening, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly as a presenter took the stage to announce a charity auction supporting youth education. Adrian, as the event's primary sponsor, was called to speak. As he approached the podium, he looked back at Elena, his expression unreadable. His speech was flawless, practiced, polished, efficient. But even as applause followed, there was something hollow in the air. When the host invited guests to share a few words or pledges, Elena felt an impulse rise within her. For a moment she hesitated. The old fear of being judged, dismissed, overshadowed. But then she remembered the woman she had promised to be. She stood, her ivory dress shimmering softly in the light, and the quiet conversation in the room faded as people turned to look. "I'd like to make a contribution," she said, her voice carrying through the microphone with calm confidence. "But more than that, I'd like to make a promise." The host smiled, a little surprised but clearly pleased. "Of course, Mrs. Carter, please go ahead." Elena looked out at the faces, powerful, privileged, influential, people who measured success in digits and deals. "For a long time," she began, "I thought that being silent was the same as being graceful. I thought that standing behind someone else was a form of love. But silence can be a cage, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to open the door and step into your own light." The room was silent, her words cutting through the air like sunlight through fog. "I used to be an artist," she continued, "and I forgot what that meant. But I've decided to start again. I'm donating the proceeds from my first new exhibition to fund art therapy for children who've lost their confidence, because I know what it feels like to lose yours." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came the applause. Not polite, not perfunctory, but genuine and warm. It swelled through the room like a wave, and Elena felt her chest tighten with emotion. She glanced at Adrian, whose expression was unreadable, a mixture of pride, confusion, and something deeper, realization. When the event ended and the crowd began to thin, Adrian found her near the balcony overlooking the city. The cool night breeze brushed against them, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "You surprised me tonight." Elena turned her gaze toward the lights below. "That's because you stopped expecting anything from me." He swallowed hard. "You were incredible in there. Everyone was talking about you." "I wasn't doing it for them," she said softly. "And not for you either. I did it for me. I needed to remember what it feels like to exist." Adrian looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I didn't realize I'd made you feel invisible." Elena gave a small, bittersweet smile. "That's the thing about invisibility, Adrian. You never notice it from the outside." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then as she turned to leave, he caught her hand gently. "Elena, what happens now?" She looked at him, and for the first time in years there was peace in her eyes. "Now," she said, "I start living again. You can come with me if you learn how to see me. But if you can't, I'll walk alone, and I'll be just fine." Her hand slipped from his grasp and she walked toward the grand staircase. Every head turned as she passed, not because of her dress or her beauty, but because of the quiet strength that radiated from her. She was no longer the forgotten woman waiting for someone to remember her. She had remembered herself. As she reached the exit, the host from earlier approached her, still smiling. "Mrs. Carter, everyone was moved by your words tonight. May I ask what inspired you to speak so suddenly, so fearlessly?" Elena paused for a moment, her eyes soft yet unflinching. "For years," she said slowly, "I kept waiting for someone to give me a gift. Attention, love, validation. But tonight I realized the only gift worth having is the one you give yourself. So when I said those words, 'Tonight I'll be my own gift,' I meant them." And with that, she stepped out into the night air, the wind catching her hair, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, the artist, the dreamer, the woman she had been, all of them finally breathed again. The world had noticed her tonight, but more importantly, she had noticed herself. The rebirth of a forgotten dream. The morning after the gala arrived softly, wrapped in a pale gold sunrise that crept through the curtains of Elena's apartment. For the first time in years, she woke before the alarm, not because of anxiety or responsibility, but because her heart felt alive again. The silence that used to suffocate her now seemed peaceful, almost sacred. She walked barefoot across the marble floor, feeling the coolness against her skin, and stopped before the mirror that had witnessed countless mornings of emptiness. But this reflection was different. The woman staring back at her wasn't hollow anymore. Her eyes carried a quiet fire, the kind that comes not from anger but from awakening. She touched her own cheek, almost disbelieving that she could feel so much after feeling nothing for so long. The gala had been a turning point, not because of the applause or the attention, but because it reminded her that her voice mattered, that she still mattered. Yet as she stood there, she also knew that one night of courage was not enough to rebuild the years she had lost. It was only the beginning, her promise to start painting again, to create something that could help children heal, echoed in her thoughts like a steady drumbeat. She walked to the corner of her apartment where the old easel still stood, draped with a white cloth like a ghost. Slowly, she pulled the cloth away, revealing the wooden frame stained with colors from a past life. Her brushes were dry, her paints half-hardened, but she smiled anyway. "We're going to start again," she whispered to herself as if speaking to an old friend. The first few strokes were hesitant, trembling like a new beginning always does. Her hand shook slightly as she dipped the brush into the blue paint and drew a single line across the empty canvas. Then another. And another. The rhythm returned slowly, like breathing after being underwater too long. Hours passed without her noticing. The morning melted into afternoon. The city's noise faded away, and all that existed was her, the colors, and the quiet hum of her own heartbeat. When she finally stepped back, she realized she wasn't painting a person or a scene, or even an idea. She was painting a feeling, freedom, the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for permission to exist. By evening, the floor was scattered with brushes, the table smeared with colors, and her hair streaked with faint traces of red and gold. She laughed quietly at her reflection in the glass window, messy, imperfect, but alive. The phone rang on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her trance. When she picked it up, she saw Adrian's name on the screen. For a moment she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button. Then with calm resolve, she pressed decline. She didn't need to talk. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some goodbyes don't need words. They just need silence strong enough to hold peace. Over the next few weeks, Elena poured herself into her art. The apartment that once felt like a cage began to transform into a studio filled with color and sound. Canvases leaned against every wall, some bright and daring, others soft and melancholic. Each painting seemed to hold a fragment of her soul stitched into its fibers. Word began to spread quietly through the art community. Old acquaintances reached out, surprised and delighted to hear that Elena Hayes was painting again. An old friend from her gallery days, Claire, came to visit one afternoon, her eyes widening as she stepped into the apartment. "Elena," she breathed, "this is extraordinary. You're back." Elena smiled, wiping a streak of paint from her arm. "Maybe not back. Maybe forward." Claire looked around, awestruck. "People would love to see these. You should hold an exhibition." The idea both thrilled and terrified her. "It's been years, Claire. I wouldn't even know where to begin." "You begin," Claire said gently, "exactly where you started, with honesty. People are hungry for something real. You have that again." That night, as Elena sat alone surrounded by her unfinished canvases, she thought about what Claire had said. The old fear crept in. The fear of being judged, of failing, of being invisible again. But then she looked around at the walls filled with color, and she realized that even if no one came, even if no one cared, she was already free. Her worth didn't depend on their applause anymore. She painted not for validation, but for life itself. Days turned into weeks, and the energy around her seemed to shift. Even the air in her home felt lighter. She started going outside more often, walking through parks she hadn't visited in years. She noticed small things she used to overlook. The laughter of children chasing pigeons, the way sunlight filtered through tree leaves, the scent of rain rising from the pavement. These simple moments reminded her of something profound, that beauty doesn't need to be grand to be meaningful. It just needs to be noticed. One afternoon, while she was sketching in the park, a little girl approached her. The child couldn't have been older than 8, with curly brown hair and wide, curious eyes. "Are you a painter?" the girl asked shyly. Elena smiled warmly. "Yes, I am. Can you paint me?" the girl asked, holding out a crumpled flower she had picked. "I want to give this to my mom. She's sick and she says flowers make her feel better." Something in that small voice touched Elena deeply. "Of course," she said softly. "Sit right here." The girl sat cross-legged on the grass, holding the wilted flower carefully, and Elena began to draw. The strokes came effortlessly this time, as if her heart guided her hand. When she finished, she tore the sketch from her pad and handed it to the girl. "Here you go. Tell your mom it's from both of us." The little girl looked at the drawing, eyes shining with awe. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Then she threw her small arms around Elena before running off. As Elena watched her go, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. That small encounter reminded her why she had fallen in love with art in the first place. It wasn't about galleries or fame. It was about connection, the invisible thread that links one heart to another. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the girl and her mother. The next morning, she called Claire. "Let's do the exhibition," she said, "but not the usual kind. I want it to be more than paintings on a wall. I want it to be a space where people can feel something again." Within weeks, the plan took shape. They rented a modest studio downtown, not the luxurious hall she once knew, but a warm, open space with high ceilings and sunlight pouring in from the windows. Elena decided to call the exhibition Visible, a simple word, but one that carried the weight of her entire journey. She invited not only collectors and critics, but also community centers, schools and shelters. She wanted children, mothers, dreamers, and people who felt unseen to walk into that room and find themselves reflected in her art. The night of the exhibition arrived quietly, without fanfare. But when she stepped into the gallery, she was met with something she hadn't expected. People. Dozens of them. Some from her past life, some complete strangers, all drawn to the authenticity that radiated from her work. The air was thick with emotion. Every painting seemed to speak its own story, of struggle, of silence, of rediscovery. And in the center of it all stood the piece she had painted after the gala. A woman standing beneath a beam of light, her head tilted upward, eyes closed, bathed in gold. The plaque beneath it read simply, "Tonight I'll be my own gift." People stood before it in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Claire watched from the corner, whispering softly, "You did it, Elena, you really did it." Elena smiled through her tears. "No," she said quietly. "We did it, all of us who were ever forgotten, all of us who found the courage to start again." As the night went on, she spoke with guests who shared their own stories. A teacher who had quit her job to follow her passion for writing. A widow who had taken up photography to heal her grief. A young boy who told her he wanted to be an artist too. Each story was a spark, and she felt them lighting up inside her one by one. Later that night, after everyone had gone, she stood alone in the quiet gallery, the lights dimmed, her paintings glowing softly in the dark. She walked to the centerpiece once more and placed her hand on the frame, whispering to herself, "You kept your promise." For the first time in so many years, she felt whole, not because the world had seen her, but because she had finally seen herself. The light she shared with the World Months passed after the visible exhibition, and the echo of that single night rippled farther than Elena Hayes could have imagined. The newspapers called her comeback the quiet revolution of art and soul. Critics praised the honesty in her brushwork, collectors offered generous bids, and yet the most important letters were the handwritten ones, notes from strangers who thanked her for reminding them that it was never too late to begin again. Some wrote from hospital rooms, others from small towns she had never heard of. All of them carried the same trembling gratitude. Every time Elena opened one of those envelopes, she realized that her story had stopped belonging only to her. It had become a bridge for others to cross back into hope. The proceeds from the exhibition became the seed of something greater. She called it the Horizon Foundation, a nonprofit art initiative that offered workshops, therapy programs, and creative scholarships for children and adults who had been silenced by hardship. She rented a sun-filled warehouse near the river, painted the walls herself, and covered them with murals of dawns, mountains, and open doors. The first group of students arrived shyly one Monday morning. Orphans, foster kids, single mothers, and elderly people who had spent decades thinking their creativity was a childish dream. Elena greeted each of them personally, pressing paintbrushes into their palms as if she were handing them keys. "Here," she told them, "this isn't about talent. It's about remembering how to feel." The days in the studio unfolded like gentle miracles. Laughter replaced silence and color replaced fear. One afternoon, a boy named Noah, barely 10 years old, painted a series of dark storms followed by a single bright kite soaring above them. When Elena asked what it meant, he said, "That's my mom. She died, but I think she's the wind that makes the kite fly." Elena felt her throat tighten. She realized that every canvas in this place was not just art. It was healing made visible. By evening, she would often stand by the large windows, watching the sunset spill gold across the river, her students' laughter drifting through the open doors. The same sun that once rose over her loneliness now illuminated a sanctuary of rebirth. But growth, as she learned, always brings its own trials. The foundation's rapid attention drew media requests, sponsorship offers, and invitations to interviews. It thrilled her, but it also stirred old fears. The more visible she became, the more she felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Late at night, she would sit at her desk, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and sketches, wondering if she was strong enough to keep this alive. During one of those weary evenings, the doorbell rang. When she opened it, she found Adrian standing there holding a small white envelope. He looked different, older, quieter, the arrogance replaced by something softer. "I saw the exhibition," he said, his voice low. "I've been trying to find the words since then." Elena stepped aside politely, gesturing for him to come in. They sat across from each other at the table where she now sketched her program outlines. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Adrian set the envelope down. "This is a donation," he said. "For the foundation, not from my company, not as publicity. From me." She studied him carefully. "Why?" He met her eyes without defense. "Because I finally understand what I destroyed. I thought power was measured in how many people listened to me, but I never listened to the one person who mattered most." You gave something to that room that night I couldn't buy. A sense of truth. I don't expect forgiveness, Elena. I just wanted to help you keep that truth alive." Elena's gaze softened. She opened the envelope and saw a check, but more than the amount, she noticed a handwritten note beneath it. "For every person I made invisible, may this bring them light." She closed it gently and nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Forgiveness isn't a word I use easily, but I believe in transformation. If you want to contribute, do it not with money, but with presence. Come see what we build here," and so he did. Adrian began visiting the foundation once a week, not as a patron but as a volunteer. He cleaned brushes, helped move supplies, even taught basic design skills to the teenagers. At first, the volunteers didn't believe he would stay. Yet he did. Week after week, humility replaced his old pride. One afternoon, as he watched Elena laughing with the children, he whispered almost to himself, "I used to think I built empires. I never realized the real empire is what you've built here." She heard him but didn't answer. Some lessons speak louder when left in silence. As the months turned into a year, the Horizon Foundation blossomed into a beacon of change. Local newspapers featured success stories of students who had gone on to win art competitions, find scholarships, or simply learn to smile again. One of the most profound moments came when Elena received an invitation from the city council, asking her to curate a public art installation celebrating women who had transformed their pain into purpose. She accepted without hesitation, deciding that the central piece would not be one of her paintings but a collaborative mural created by all her students. She titled it, "The Gift." On the day of the unveiling, hundreds gathered at the city plaza. The mural stretched across the wall like a river of stories, portraits, colors, and messages intertwined in a symphony of resilience. When Elena stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieted. "A year ago," she began, "I whispered a promise to myself that I would stop waiting to be someone's gift and start becoming my own. Today, every brushstroke on this wall is a reminder that when you rise, you lift others with you. This is what healing looks like, shared." The applause that followed was thunderous, but beneath it she heard something deeper, the collective heartbeat of people who had decided to believe again. After the ceremony, as dusk settled and the lights around the mural flickered on, Elena stood with Adrian near the edge of the plaza. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, glancing at the children dancing nearby. "All of us who dared to begin again," he smiled faintly. "You taught me something I never understood before, that love isn't possession, it's participation." She nodded, her eyes on the glowing mural. "And forgiveness," she said, "isn't about erasing the past. It's about using it as paint for a better picture." That night, as she walked home along the river, the air smelled of rain and jasmine. The city lights shimmered in the water like scattered jewels. She thought of the years she had spent trapped in silence, and how those same years had prepared her to understand others' pain. Everything, even the darkness, had been necessary to make the light this bright. When she reached the studio, she found her students' latest works drying on the racks. Small suns, open doors, hearts drawn in vivid color. She smiled, whispering to herself, "We are all gifts, every single one of us." As the rain began to fall gently outside, she turned off the lights and stood by the window watching the reflection of the murals glow across the wet streets. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, marking the close of another day. But for Elena, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a continuation, a quiet unfolding of a life that had finally found its purpose. She had once longed to be seen, but now she understood something deeper. Being visible was never about the eyes of others. It was about opening your own. The gift that outlived her shadow years. Slipped by like quiet pages turning in a well-loved book, and the world that once ignored Elena Hayes now carried her name like a gentle anthem of resilience. The Horizon Foundation had grown beyond the converted warehouse by the river. It now filled multiple buildings, sunlit studios, therapy rooms alive with laughter, and traveling programs that reached schools, hospitals, and refugee shelters. What began as a personal act of healing had become a global movement of color and compassion. The phrase "be your own gift" had spread across social media, not as a slogan but as a shared vow whispered by thousands who had found strength in her story. Elena's days began early and ended late, yet she never felt weary. Every morning she walked through the foundation's halls greeting students by name, touching each canvas as though blessing it. She spent afternoons mentoring young artists whose eyes burned with the same hunger she had once felt. Her nights were quieter, reserved for painting alone in her private studio at home, where she still used the old easel that had witnessed her first trembling strokes of rediscovery. The walls were covered with letters from people she had never met, soldiers who painted to forget war, widows who found peace in sculpting, children who said art helped them dream when the world around them seemed to have forgotten joy. Those letters were her medals, her trophies, her proof that pain could be transformed into beauty when given the right light. Despite her accomplishments, Elena remained humble. She refused grand titles, declined lucrative offers to commercialize her work, and turned down invitations to glamorous events. "I've already attended all the parties I'll ever need," she would say with a soft smile. "Now I want to build places where others can dance." It was during one of those humble days that she received a letter bearing the insignia of the United Nations. Inside was an invitation to address a global forum on creativity and mental wellness. The letter called her a living example of how art restores humanity. For a moment she just stared at the words, feeling both pride and disbelief. Then she folded the letter carefully and whispered, "All right, world. Let's see how far this gift can travel." When she arrived in Geneva months later, the auditorium was a mosaic of faces from every continent: politicians, educators, healers, and dreamers. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights bathed her in a golden hue reminiscent of that night years ago when she had first found her voice at the gala. She looked out over the audience and felt no fear, only gratitude. "I used to think art was about perfection," she began, her voice steady. "Now I know it's about permission, the permission to feel, to fail, to begin again. When you give a child a brush, you're not teaching them to paint. You're teaching them to see. And once a person learns to see beauty again, healing has already begun." When she finished, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Yet all she could think of were the small hands back home dipping brushes into bright jars of color. Her return to the city was met with celebration, but beneath the applause Elena began to sense a quiet fatigue within her body. She dismissed it at first, attributing it to the endless travel and long hours, but as weeks passed, the exhaustion deepened. Doctors later confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Her heart, long overworked and quietly strained, was faltering. The diagnosis was not dire but clear. She needed rest, stillness, and distance from the relentless rhythm she had created. That evening she sat alone by the river, watching the ripples shimmer beneath the moonlight, and accepted the truth. "Maybe," she whispered, "it's time to let others carry the torch." Rather than mourn, she prepared. She appointed a board of young artists she had mentored for years, each one a reflection of what she had once been. Among them was Noah, the little boy who had once painted the kite for his mother. Now 17, he had grown into a remarkable painter with a heart as vast as his imagination. When she told him about her decision, his eyes filled with tears. "You can't stop, Ms. Hayes. You're the reason we all started." She smiled, brushing a streak of paint from his cheek like she used to. "I'm not stopping, Noah. I'm just changing my canvas. The world will always need new hands to hold the brush." Weeks later, the foundation held its anniversary celebration, an event not of luxury, but of gratitude. Hundreds attended, from former students to international supporters, each carrying a single flower to symbolize life blooming from darkness. When Elena walked onto the stage, the crowd rose as one. The lights glowed softly against her silver-streaked hair, and for a moment she felt the same rush she had felt years ago when she had first said those fateful words. "Tonight, I'll be my own gift." She looked at the sea of faces before her and began to speak, her voice carrying the calm strength of someone who had already made peace with every storm. "I once lived invisible inside a house of mirrors that only reflected someone else's image," she said. "But the day I picked up a brush again, I understood that invisibility ends the moment you decide to look at yourself with kindness. We are taught to wait for love, for recognition, for permission. But waiting is a thief of life. Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself. Don't wait to be seen. See yourself. And when you do, don't keep that light to yourself, share it, because the world needs what only you can give." The room was silent except for the quiet sound of people crying. When she stepped down from the stage, every person there reached out to touch her hand, as if passing a current of gratitude from one soul to another. That night marked not an ending but a beginning for everyone she had ever inspired. Over the following months, Elena slowed her pace. She spent mornings painting by the river, evenings writing letters to the students she could no longer visit, and nights watching the city lights with quiet satisfaction. Her health declined gradually but peacefully. When she finally passed away 2 years later, she did so in her sleep, surrounded by her paintings, each one a piece of her journey, glowing softly in the dawn light that crept through her window. The world mourned her with love, but more than mourning, people celebrated. Across cities and towns, murals sprang up with her words written beneath them. Be your own gift. At the Horizon Foundation, now expanded to multiple countries, her students held an annual event called the Night of Light. Every participant painted a candle on a canvas, symbolizing the moment they chose to see themselves again. Noah, now the director, stood before the largest of these murals, a portrait of Elena, her eyes turned toward the sky, brush in hand. She taught us, he told the crowd, that art isn't about color, it's about courage. Every time you pick up a brush, every time you decide to heal instead of hide, she lives again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, hundreds of candles were lit, their flames flickering like tiny echoes of her spirit. The light shimmered across the river, the same river where she had once stood alone years ago, whispering to herself that she would start again. Now her voice seemed to travel through every ripple, every reflection, saying softly to anyone willing to listen, "You are not forgotten. You are not too late. The world still needs your color." And so her legacy continued, not in fame or fortune, but in the quiet bravery of countless souls who looked at their pain and chose to paint it into hope. Elena Hayes had once been a woman ignored, unseen, and forgotten, but she left the world luminous with the truth she had discovered in her heart, that the greatest gift one can ever give is the courage to become visible again.